Two hikers, identified as Mark, 33, and Jess, 28, vanished inside the inner gorge after a routine descent turned into a nightmare. Officials cite heat and disorientation, but tonight, sources close to the case describe undisclosed footage of a towering, upright figure hauling a human body uphill with impossible ease. The timeline is tight. The footprints stop. The drag marks rise, then simply end. Rangers call it exposure/fall. Locals say it happens every season. We've obtained the survivors' statements, the precise camp coordinates, and a partial sequence from motion-triggered cameras set just yards from where the first hiker disappeared. Stay with us as we reconstruct the final hours, analyze the footage frame by frame, and ask the question no one wants on record. What, if anything, decided who walked out and who never will? Authorities confirmed the missing individuals were part of a four-person hiking group from Flagstaff, Arizona. All four were considered familiar with the terrain, having previously completed multiple overnight trips across the state. Sources close to the friends describe them as careful, experienced, and well-equipped, far from the reckless profile typically associated with backcountry rescue. The group consisted of 2 men and 2 women in their late 20s and early 30s. Among them was a meticulous planner who reportedly carried printed maps, hydration schedules, and safety instructions. Another member, known for pushing harder than anyone else, often encouraged the group to explore deeper sections of the canyon. A third was described as the social glue, keeping tensions low and morale high. The final member worked locally as a mechanic, hiking on weekends like countless residents living near the South Rim. Friends and family claim nothing about this trip sounded dangerous. The plan was simple: descend from the rim, camp for a short period, record video footage, and return with a memorable story. They had done similar routes before without incident. At the ranger station, witnesses recall the group pointing at faded missing person flyers pinned outside the office. Most hikers photograph the view and walk right past those warnings. This group reportedly joked about them. Investigators now call that moment bitter irony. One detail stands out. The flyers are not seasonal. They do not rotate with tourist flow. Even year-round storms do not peel them down. Officials quietly admit some remain posted for months, sometimes years, because no remains are ever recovered. The last known clip recorded by the group showed them smiling, laughing, and posing near the trailhead. It is currently held by investigators. According to the surviving pair, there was nothing unusual in anyone's behavior. No tension, no mistakes. By every measurable metric, this was a standard descent. Nothing in that footage hints that within 48 hours, 2 of them would vanish without a cry for help, without signs of injury, and without leaving more than a few dusty boot prints behind. Tonight, the question isn't whether they were prepared, it's whether preparation ever mattered. The descent began under calm conditions. Late-season temperatures on the rim were cool enough to see breath in the morning air, an atmosphere that lulls even seasoned hikers into a false sense of safety. But as every ranger will quietly admit, the Grand Canyon does not reveal its true danger until you go down. Heat builds in invisible layers. Moisture evaporates before sweat can form. By early afternoon, conditions inside the gorge were described by experts as oven-grade. Surviving members report that water supplies dwindled far faster than anticipated. Hydration schedules were followed, yet symptoms of dehydration appeared early. Lightheadedness, gray vision at the edges, and a metallic taste in the mouth. Rangers later confirmed this pattern is common, especially in late September, when interior temperatures spiked despite mild weather up top. Then came the first unsettling discovery. Not a backpack, not a torn shirt. A single, high-quality hiking boot resting off the trail. Not weather-rotted, not sun-bleached. Shoe laces intact. No drag mark, no blood. Nothing to suggest a wildlife attack or a fall. One missing boot could be dismissed as simple human error. But search and rescue teams note that abandoned footwear often appears near regions associated with unexplained disappearances. Several members of the group reportedly paused at this site. One asked for a photograph, another laughed. None realized the significance at the time. Investigators now regard it as a potential marker, an early sign that someone had already been removed from the area. As the descent continued, the canyon's psychological effect took hold. Sound changes. Echo behavior becomes distorted. Distances appear shortened, while shadows lengthen unnaturally. Experts point out that the gorge plays tricks on depth perception and can silence screams within seconds. But witnesses insist no panic occurred at this stage. The group remained confident, joking, and, crucially, together. By sunset, the team fell short of their intended campsite, not through poor navigation, but because the heat forced slower movement. They set up camp along a dry wash, in the partial shelter of an overhang. From the outside, this decision appears logical. Rock to their backs, minimal exposure, natural cover from wind. Seasoned hikers frequently choose similar terrain. But according to wilderness search coordinators, those dry washes funnel sound deeper than expected. If something wanted to track them, it would know exactly where they settled for the night. Even then, nothing suggested that within 24 hours, one member would vanish in broad daylight. Investigators reviewing the timeline emphasize that everything up to this point was routine. No wrong turns, no reported injuries, no separation. The stage was set. Whatever else was in that canyon was already watching. As darkness settled over the inner gorge, the campsite appeared peaceful. For the first several hours, the group reported nothing but the expected chorus of nighttime wildlife. Coyotes barked distantly, insects buzzed, and the river's faint rumble echoed against the rock. But sometime after midnight, that soundtrack shifted. According to the survivors, a new sound emerged, low, drawn out, and resonant. Witnesses compared it to the deep vibration of diesel engines in a confined garage. It was less heard and more felt, pressing into the chest cavity like a slow, rolling wave. Wildlife experts consulted by reporters say no known desert animal produces that kind of sub-frequency at that volume. One group member recorded the noise on their phone. The audio, now in the possession of investigators, has not been publicly released. However, internal notes describe the sound as unclassified and pressure-weighted, with unusual echo patterns. Shortly after, rocks began falling from the ridges above their camp, not cascading debris, not wind-loosened gravel, small, spaced impacts, almost rhythmic. Each stone clattered down as if a deliberate footstep had nudged it from the ledge. Surviving witnesses report the spacing was too slow and intentional to be landslide behavior. When search coordinators later analyzed the terrain, they confirmed something could have moved along the ridge directly above the camp without being seen. The angle of the rock wall, combined with the faint starlight, would have cloaked anything beyond the immediate fire glow. At this point, the group swept the ridges with flashlight beams. That's when two reflective points, eyes, were seen high above. But the spacing was unusually wide. The height off the ground was greater than even large deer, and instead of flaring brightly and vanishing, the eyes narrowed. Specialists later noted that eye narrowing is a distinctly human behavior, absent in typical wildlife glare. Still, the group rationalized the incident. Investigators frequently see this pattern. The human mind categorizes unknown stimuli into familiar shapes. It's a survival mechanism. One surviving member reportedly insisted, probably deer, despite privately acknowledging the proportions were wrong. After the lights went dark, silence returned briefly. Then the footsteps resumed, slow, deliberate, circling. Surviving witnesses state the air became unnaturally still. Even insects quieted. Ambient noise vanished, creating what search units refer to as acoustic vacuum, a phenomenon occasionally recorded before predator activity. One member whispered they felt studied. Another said it felt like the darkness itself was leaning closer. Rangers would later dismiss these descriptions as fatigue-induced paranoia, but veteran canyon guides offered a different assessment off-record. When the night goes quiet down there, something large is moving, something that isn't afraid. Authorities maintain no evidence of predatory wildlife exists in the area, yet the sound of deliberate pacing continued around the campsite for nearly an hour without breaching the edge of visible firelight. Whoever or whatever circled them that night night seemed to understand exactly where the light ended and where the darkness began, and it kept its distance, because predators sometimes wait. By late morning of the second day, temperatures inside the canyon had risen sharply. The surviving pair report that each breath felt like inhaling heated air from an oven door. Dehydration symptoms intensified, slowed reaction time, dizziness, and vision tunneling. Tension inside the group began to surface. Sharp, exhausted comments replaced friendly banter. One member insisted on increasing speed to reach a shaded basin ahead, while another argued it was unsafe to push during the hottest window of the day. Witnesses state that the group finally paused under a narrow strip of shade formed by two leaning slabs of sandstone. There, a short argument broke out over pacing and ration strategy. One hiker, the most physically confident, volunteered to advance just 50 yards to scout a narrow choke point, promising to return within moments. According to the survivors, nothing sounded fearful in his voice. There was no anxiety, no hesitation. He walked toward the pass casually, as if stepping behind a curtain. The survivors estimate no more than 30 seconds passed before they followed after him, long before disorientation or accidental wandering could occur. When they rounded the same bend, he was gone, not missing down the trail, not perched above on a ledge. Gone, as if a doorway had closed behind him. Search and rescue analysis later confirmed there were no sudden drop-offs, no hidden crevices, and no loose rock formations capable of swallowing someone silently. Soil composition in the pass is powdery and records footprints clearly. The hiker's boot prints lead forward and then simply end. No return prints, no scramble marks, no signs of animal involvement. The remaining hikers called his name repeatedly. Their voices bounced strangely, as if muted mid-echo. They marked the exact location with tape, recorded the time, and began a controlled search pattern, textbook behavior. Authorities quietly admitted this is extremely uncommon in panic cases. When no response came, fear settled into the group with a hollow weight. The canyon's walls seemed to press inward, turning open space into a chamber. Every direction felt wrong. Every shadow felt occupied. Officials later classified this event as likely accidental separation during heat stress. However, veteran rangers, speaking anonymously, acknowledged something unusual. No solitary hiker vanishes in under a minute without leaving even one misstep behind. What removed him did it quietly, efficiently, and without leaving a trace. The morning after the first disappearance, exhaustion had hollowed out the remaining 3 hikers. None of them slept. Every shifting pebble outside the camp sounded like a threat. Dawn arrived with a pale, washed-out glow that provided no comfort, only visibility. According to the survivors, silence hung inside the canyon like a held breath. Temperatures were still manageable, but would soon surge again. That small window of cooler air convinced one member to take action. She proposed hiking back toward a higher ridge to attempt cell signal. Her logic was sound. She could remain within sight the entire way, and if their missing friend returned, the others would still be present. Witnesses report that she reassured the group repeatedly, attempting to keep panic from spreading. The 2 remaining hikers agreed, uneasy but desperate. They could see the exact curve she would follow. They could see the dull shine of the ridge just beyond. Nothing about this plan sounded reckless. She walked steadily, checking over her shoulder every few seconds, waving with forced confidence. At roughly 60 yards, she rounded a gradual bend, never leaving visual range for more than 3 or 4 heartbeats. When her silhouette slipped behind the rock, the survivors prepared to call her name again. She did not reappear. Both survivors sprinted to the exact spot, adrenaline overriding dehydration. Investigators later confirmed that terrain in this area allows no sudden drop-offs, no crevices, and no hidden hollows wide enough to swallow someone silently. Yet only one trace remained on the ground, a distinctive drag impression in the dust. It began where her footprints ended and pulled sharply uphill against gravity. Search and rescue reports refused to label this pattern as predatory behavior. Their official statement cites soil distortion from frantic movement, but independent forensic trackers describe it differently. They claim the mark suggests a single-handed grip on a limb, rim, hauling weight efficiently. Midway up the slope, the dragline abruptly disappears. Not because it reached bare stone, but because whatever was pulling her stopped leaving prints, as if the burden was simply lifted and carried away. The two survivors, now shaking uncontrollably, understood the canyon was not just vast, it was hunting. With their supplies dwindling and their nerves shredded, the remaining two hikers abandoned their camp and began a forced ascent out of the canyon. Both survivors later described this climb as automatic, a blur of panic and instinct rather than conscious decision-making. Severe dehydration symptoms were evident: tremors, slurred speech, and difficulty focusing. According to medical guidelines, both were within hours of heat stroke thresholds. When they finally reached the rim, they encountered other visitors, tourists in clean clothing, snapping photographs, unaware of the emergency unfolding only a few miles below. The survivors marched straight to the nearest ranger station. Witnesses describe one hiker shaking violently, barely able to articulate what happened. Another struggled to swallow, complaining of a metallic taste, an early warning of cellular dehydration. Rangers listened intently, typed notes, and maintained calm expressions. But several details stand out in internal logs. At first mention of drag marks uphill, one ranger allegedly paused writing, exchanged a quiet glance with a colleague, and resumed with practiced neutrality. When "vanished behind a bend in seconds" was repeated, staff shifted tone to clinical reassurance. They suggested the events might be misremembered due to stress-induced timeline distortion, a phrase commonly used when reports cannot fit protocol. A helicopter was dispatched to search nearby ledges and obvious drop zones, standard procedure. It circled briefly, then returned. Officials informed the survivors that heat confusion is the most likely explanation. That disappears happen more often than the public realizes. That terrain misleads distance and direction. The paperwork would later reflect the same story. The official cause was entered as probable fall. No mention of uphill drag patterns, no acknowledgement of disappearing footprints, no forensic analysis of disturbed soil. When one survivor insisted something carried both victims away, the ranger repeated a line that would haunt him: "We see this every season." After statements were taken and a single SD card was collected for evidence, the surviving pair were gently escorted out. No emergency teams mobilized, no extended search grid authorized. They expected alarm. They found polite dismissal. By sunset, the canyon had swallowed two people without a scream, and the official record blamed the heat. Weeks passed after the official investigation quietly closed. The families of the missing received sympathy, but no answers, only paperwork written in sterile language. Presumed deceased, likely exposure, probable fall. For the two survivors, those phrases offered no closure. Instead, they created a corrosive mixture of anger, guilt, and disbelief. Nightmares replayed the moment their friends vanished without sound. Intermittent sleep was punctured by phantom dragging noises. Every missing person poster felt personal. According to close acquaintances, the survivor who first saw the drag marks began obsessively reviewing satellite maps and trail elevation charts. The other compulsively replayed footage of their last normal moments, pausing on frames where everyone still looked alive, unaware. For weeks, the two convinced themselves that a second search team, better equipped, better staffed, would be deployed. None was. When no new search grids were announced, the reality hit. Case was finished on paper. Eventually, one survivor whispered the idea that would change everything. Return to the canyon. Not to camp, not to grieve, but to collect proof. Evidence impossible to reduce to a line in a report. The other resisted. Authorities had already dismissed their accounts, but as days passed, the refusal softened. Guilt is persuasive. It convinces the living they owe the missing one more attempt. The plan was simple, yet reckless. They would return quietly, telling family members they were performing a closure hike, leaving out any mention of cameras. They purchased hunting-grade motion trail cams, infrared sensors, night triggers, timestamps, and removable SD cards. Additional batteries, spare memory, and high-powered headlamps joined their packs. They also carried a basic satellite ping device, insurance against another disappearance. As they prepared to descend, the same gas station attendant who served them before recognized their faces. This time, time, she did not smile. Witnesses overheard her softly warn, "Some places keep what they take." She said nothing more. When the canyon walls rose around them again, both survivors reported an uncanny sensation, like stepping into a room mid-argument. The air felt heavier. Shadows seemed to linger longer. They moved slower, speaking in whispers without realizing why. Eventually, they reached the old campsite. The fire pit remained, half buried in dust. The bare spot where a missing friend once sat looked disturbingly like a grave outline. Neither survivor stepped on it. Fear can shape ritual. They installed cameras in a grid formation. One pointed upslope toward the ridge where something had paced. Another aimed down the wash where rocks once rolled deliberately. A third covered the narrow choke point where the first friend vanished. For the first time, they were not laughing. They were listening. When night arrived, the canyon did too, and something answered. Sometime after 2 a.m., motion alerts triggered on one of the trail cameras. The infrared lens snapped to life, producing grainy black and white footage. Investigators who later reviewed the clip described a towering, upright figure passing through the frame. Its shoulders were unusually broad, arms stretching nearly to its knees, with a forward-tilted head that never turned toward the camera. In one hand, it held a limp human form by the ankle, dragging the body uphill with alarming ease. Clothing on the figure matched one of the missing hikers. Minutes later, another clip captured the same creature returning, this time hauling a smaller body by the wrist. The movement appeared effortless, smooth, and disturbingly calm. Experts agreed no known animal transports weight like this. The footage ended abruptly, but the message was clear. Something in that canyon collects. Panic overtook the survivors. They tore down equipment, shoved memory cards into pockets, and fled. As they ascended, they repeatedly heard stones shifting above them, as if something paced parallel on higher ground. Occasional moonlight revealed a massive silhouette watching silently from a ridge. It never pursued, never roared, never advanced. It simply observed, as though making a decision. Survivors described the encounter as being escorted out. By dawn, they reached the rim and collapsed at a ranger station, begging officials to review the footage. One card was confiscated for chain of evidence. Search efforts were not expanded. The missing hikers were ruled lost to exposure and fall. Authorities declined to discuss the silhouette. The survivors left with one terrifying belief: the canyon allowed them to leave, intentionally.